This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
You know, the funny thing about that intro is that for something that looks totally amateur, like it's literally just a bunch of sound bites overlaid by a crappy straight ahead rock groove, still took me about 40 minutes to piece that all together and make it sound good. I always overestimate just how long the editing process can take with these shows. Anyway, if you all are checking out the show for the first time, this is the Five Starr Wrestling Report. Each week here on YouTube and Rumble, we bring you two podcast shows on Mondays and Fridays. Monday's show is typically dedicated to full coverage of AEW Rampage, NWA Power, and weekend pay-per-views or news stories. However, with Dynamite being on Saturday this week, it kind of screws with the usual format I run with. And Fridays are typically the shows that are the recap shows for NXT TV and AEW Dynamite. So a little all over the place right now. However, I think I am going to be doing some reformatting with these shows in the coming weeks. And I'll get into detail on that a little later on, exactly where I want to go with the Friday shows, because well, let's just say I'm not sure how much longer I can put up with this NXT crap, so stick around for that one. As you can also probably tell by the title of the show, we are going to also be covering the finals of the G1 Climax tournament, and once that recap is done, anything New Japan related will probably take a back seat on the program here going forward as well. Which isn't all that shocking, because I've noticed that the G1 shows that I've been talking about over the last month really haven't generated a lot of views or interest. So, yeah, I guess it's just not on the top of people's priority list either. Anyway, I'll cover more of that in a bit. As per usual, though, if you are new to the channel, please make sure you subscribe, comment, and like the video for me. Commenting probably being the most essential thing you can do. And as noted, you can also check the show out on Rumble by clicking the link in the description. It'll take you right over to the site to watch it there. And as always, if you guys have not done so already, please check out my article content over at the Chairshot website. You can go to www.chairshot.com, click under the opinion column, and you will see my article content each week posted under the name Star. They're relatively short reads. I try to be as insightful as I can, and I try to write on a broad range of topics. So if you're into opinion pieces and you like getting different perspectives on things that usually you don't hear people talking about in the wrestling community, I think you'll enjoy my work. It does get very philosophical at times, so if you're a fan of that stuff as well, you'll see a little bit of crossover there. All that out of the way, I think we're ready to get going here. As noted just a minute ago, this is going to be a show primarily centered around NXT and the G1, and once Dynamite gets back to its normal Wednesday schedule next week, I will get back to the usual format of reviewing NXT and AEW Dynamite on the same show. Oh boy, NXT. My God, what have they done to my baby? Maybe I'm alone here, but I always feel with this new color scheme they've got going now, I always feel so obligated to watch the show on LSD or something. Like, I know a lot of people went back and forth about the whole logo change and trying to make the venue higher value and, with better lighting and visuals and all that stuff. And I get that to a degree, but God, this color scheme is just so wacky. We begin the show with Carmelo Hayes and Trick coming out to do a promo. Hayes, obviously the new North American champion for those of you that did not see the show last week. And discounting Trick's verbiage, because I never know what the fuck that guy's saying, Hayes actually cut a relatively decent promo here. Says that he came in and plowed through the competition in the breakout tournament, sat around quietly for a while scouting to see who he was going to cash in his contract against. Said that as long as he's the North American champion, he considers it the A championship of the brand. And that is when Johnny Gargano's music hits, and Trick immediately no-sells it by asking, who is that? Who is interrupting the champ? And for a minute there, I actually couldn't blame Trick or anyone out there if they completely forgot that Johnny even existed on this program. But no, as it turns out, he's still around. And well, he basically said he's had fun over the last couple months doing bad comedy and goofy pre-tapes for a while, but now it's time to get back to refocusing on being Johnny Wrestling. And in case you can't take a joke, no, Gargano didn't blatantly say he was doing bad comedy. Although it's probably been the most entertaining stuff I've seen Johnny do since his feud with Adam Cole 2 years ago, if I'm being frank. They kind of went back and forth for a bit. Hayes took some pot shots at Indy, and it all capped off with Johnny saying that he does have a daughter now, and his son-in-law is also here too. And of course, the heels turn around, and Dexter's just in the ring like the fucking Undertaker. And they end up getting into a brief melee before running for the hills. And aside from the hokey ending there, I actually didn't hate this opening segment. I still kind of think Hayes should have cashed in his contract on MSK when they did that four-way just to make Trick feel like a little more than just a mouthpiece or a side hustle. But Hayes is doing pretty well for himself right now. He's a solid worker, good promo. He's got a presence to him. It's just unfortunate that he's small and Vince will never see anything in him. But, you know, for what he's doing in NXT right now, I think it's getting him over. I mean, there are lots of green flags there. And I think him and Johnny can actually have a good title match. I don't know why it's not booked for the Halloween Havoc show next week, but whatever. So then we had Odyssey Jones versus Andre Chase. Apparently Andre now has his student section in the crowd for his matches. Which, looking back, I kind of wish they would have done more with that there. But I heard he said last week that Andre Chase University is probably among my favorite skits right now they're doing on the show, second to Rex Steiner. His matches are less impressive in terms of entertaining television, but I'm sure this will all lead to another classic installment of Chase U where Andre will lash out at the next geek in his class that tries to challenge him on his techniques. Anyway, match was a short squash deal, and actually by the end I mean that literally. Jones made a short comeback, hit a running rolling senton onto Andre, and then pinned him with a splash. Nothing to it. But speaking of some of my favorite things on the show, I got to watch the Creed brothers in action this week. They wrestled Fabio Ichabod and Marcel Deschel. Unfortunately, not the Creed Bros match I really wanted, mostly because I had to see them work and sell instead of just picking up the Imperium dorks and tossing them around like sandbags. And making matters even worse here, they actually beat the Creeds in this match. Well, I knew it was probably only a matter of time before they'd fuck up one of the only redeeming qualities on this show right now. The whole deal at the end here was Ikemen Jiro and Kushida running out to get into a brawl with the Diamond Mine. And with all that pandemonium going on, Marcel rolls up one of the Creed Bros and pins him after kicking out at like 2 7/8. And by the way, that wasn't the only botched-looking pin we saw on the show. In fact, we saw another one like 5 minutes later. Oh yeah, and they are still trying to get MSK over as a thing. It's not working. we had a very wacky pre-tape with Kyle O'Reilly and Von Wagner going camping. And the visual alone of seeing O'Reilly with a hiking bike was hilarious in and of itself, but no, that didn't even begin to scratch the surface of just how god-awful this was. So Wagner pulls up in a pickup truck and basically tells Kyle to ditch the bike because they're about to have some male bonding time. And yeah, I figured maybe this would have at least led to something men usually bond over, like fishing, hunting, rock climbing, something to that degree. But instead, they are hiking along a trail doing horrible dialogue. It's literally something filmed straight out of a high school acting class presentation. And Wagner goes to pick up a giant piece of lumber. They end up doing some exercises with it. And it all ends with both guys sharing a 12 ounce by a bonfire. And apparently they are friends now because Wagner is out there and Kyle is out there too. Alright then. By the way, this has got to be a total rib on Vince's part. He probably knows damn good and well that Kyle is really awkward at doing promos and acting. So he's probably sitting there going, God damn it, pal, we need a sketch with Kyle go camping. Let him talk. That'll really put over his strengths. All the while, Kyle's probably reading the script over like, dude, can I just go wrestle Roderick Strong or something, bruh? So I think I see where they want to go with Joe Gacy now. He is now a watered-down Bray Wyatt. I think it's only a matter of time before we hear him calling for everyone to follow the buzzards. We had Legado del Fantasma in the ring doing a promo. I don't know what was said. I was too busy catching up on notes and not caring about Legado del Fantasma because, well, no one really cares about Legado del Fantasma at this point. And this all led to Elektra Lopez and Cora Jade in a match, which was short. And that was probably a good idea. And looking back, it's probably the best thing I can say about it. Cora won with a cradle, and as noted earlier, this was the second match in a row where the person getting pinned kicked out at 2.99, and they still counted it as a 3. Whatever. And from one terrible women's match to another, we got this 3-way with Io Shirai, JC Jane, and whoever in the fuck Indy's partner is. I can never remember her name. And she didn't get an entrance either, so guess she's not all that important. And I absolutely hate that I have to affiliate Io with a terrible women's match, but like I said last week, man, Io is easily the best female worker they have in NXT, but she cannot mask all the green talent in that division by herself. It is just not humanly possible. She tried here, but she is not a miracle worker. And they proceeded to have a very lousy 3-way, as to be expected when you have inexperienced workers in a multi-person match that's all about moves. That's why I fucking hate 3-ways and 4-ways in pro wrestling anymore, because no one knows how to book them effectively. Obviously, the spot here that everyone's going to be talking about is the deal right before the commercial break where JC tried for a suicide dive to the girl that wasn't Io, completely fucked it up, and damn near broke her neck crashing on the mat, which the camera plainly caught in full view. I mean, I don't know what you want me to say about it. Just another classic example of stupid fucking people in the business trying shit they have no business trying, knowing that they're completely incapable of pulling it off. I mean, I watch AEW every week, so I'm kind of numb to seeing botch spots and guys and gals almost killing themselves doing pointless dives. What these idiots in the business need to do is listen to Dusty Rhodes and understand the importance of the quote and why he said it. Don't do shit you don't know how to do. You do not do shit you don't know how to do. Absolutely right, bruh. Did this match need a completely futile suicide dive that would have added nothing to the match anyway? No. Is the suicide dive some monumental, never-before-seen move that needed to be broken out here to pop the crowd? No. We see suicide dives every week in multiple segments on every wrestling show. It's about as overdone as the Canadian Destroyer at this point. Nobody cares. All this did was detract from a match and took JC out of the match entirely because the medical team wouldn't clear her. EO won. It's about the only good thing I can say about it. And the stip here is that the winner got to spin the wheel and make the deal for, I guess, what is still being billed as a three-way for the women's tag belts. Although, judging the situation with JC, I don't even know if it'll end up being a three-way in the end. And the match is going to be a ladder match. Oh, great. Sounds like a grand idea. Let's take 6 girls, over 50% of them being green as goose shit, and let's stick them all in a gimmick match where they're all going to be taking dangerous bumps and landing awkwardly on furniture. Can't imagine anything could go horribly wrong there. We had a series of rapid-fire pre-tapes that I completely and totally didn't pay any attention to. I know one involved Tony D'Angelo, and the other involved the debut promo for that Solo Sikoa guy next week. But the one pre-tape I did briefly jot notes down for was his goofy skit with Kushida and Ikemen Jiro in the bathroom. Kushida basically told Jiro that he needs Style Strong to fit in, and then Jiro dumped out Kushida's suitcase to pull out some of his older gear that he used to wear. And, well, they had me hooked here right up until the very end when Kushida put the puffer jacket on Jiro. Or, I'm sorry, Jiro put the puffer jacket on Kushida and then tells him to go back to the future. At which point the lights conveniently turn blue and both guys awkwardly pose in front of the camera. Fake. Tony D'Angelo wrestled an opponent, as Vic Joseph kept referring to him here as, and that's about all I have to say about it. Dude seems like a solid worker, but my God, is this gimmick death TV. Anyway, they did a quick post-match promo where the ring interviewer asked Tony about Lash Legend's missing agent or something. You know, the guy that's been locked in the back of Tony's vehicle trunk for the last week. The one that was captured on live camera with the cameraman directly filming it. Apparently no one ever filed a report or anything. Would the cameraman just walk away after that? But that's okay, because much like I do with virtually everything I see on the show every week the second it's over, forget about it. Duke Hudson is still playing poker. I'm contemplating my life watching this show. So then we were supposed to get the Legato lackeys against Brooks and Jensen, but Joaquin Wilde ends up laying him out with a chair in the entrance tunnel. And I guess because Legato are a bunch of idiots, instead of just bailing out the second after they did the hit and run angle, they just meander on out to the ring for reasons. So lo and behold, they cut to commercial. Brooks and Jensen come back out for the match anyway, and they proceed to have the scheduled match like nothing happened 2 minutes prior. So what the fuck was the point of the pre-match angle? To just do an angle? Who writes this shit? Are we sure Russo's not back on the booking team? Anyway, the whole match was Legato getting heat on Brooks until Jensen got the hot tag at the end, made a quick comeback, went outside to take a shot at Escobar, and as he gets back into the ring, Raul Mendoza blind tags in, Legato drop kicks Brooks off the apron, and then they pin Jensen anyway. Way to fucking bury your babyface team here, guys. Lay him out before the match, have him sell for the entirety of the match, and then beat him in the end like dweebs. To a team, no less, that... God, I don't even remember the last time Raul or Joaquin won a match. Been a hot minute. We got a pre-tape to hype up this Raquel Gonzalez and Mandy Rose title match for the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view, which was actually a pretty good little video package, all things considered. I presume Mandy's winning the belt next week, which, I mean, judging the current state of this women's division, sure. I mean, who the fuck else is ready to win that belt right now? In a match featuring a guy that I really wanted to be more invested in, but it is so hard to do so when he's booked like he doesn't matter, it's LA Knight versus Grayson Waller, with the winner getting to host Halloween Havoc next week. Oh, but by the way, before this, we had a terribly hokey Scooby-Doo deal in the locker room where Trick and Carmelo Hayes are trying to hunt down the North American title, and the blow-off here being Hayes and Trick opening a spooky locker and grabbing a drawing of Dexter Lumis and Johnny Gargano, basically telling them to come fight them at the show next week. Well, I'll at least admit this. If there is a character on this show that perfectly fits the bill for a modern-day Halloween character, Lumis is at the top of that list. Anyway, Knight and Waller had a match. Knight won, and I honestly didn't care. And the main event for the night was Tommaso Ciampa and Rex Steiner versus the Grizzled Young Veterans. But the most important question here that we all must ponder: can Ciampa and Steiner coexist before their title match next week? Fuck you. The match was not bad, but again, how could you possibly care by this point? I mean, a real simple story was Steiner killing GYD early on. Ciampa blind tags himself in, gets into a brief argument with Steiner, but gets clubbed from behind by the heels. They pretty much spend the entire match beating down Ciampa, which kind of makes your top champion look like a dork, but what can you do? Ciampa ended up planting Drake with a DDT, and the whole finishing sequence here was Ciampa going for the tag, but Steiner gets down from the apron to take out Gibson, who was making a beeline toward him. Ciampa ends up bitch-slapping Steiner, in which made absolutely no sense at all. I mean, Ciampa could clearly tell Steiner was going to take out Gibson before he got yanked off the apron, but Ciampa's all pissed off, like, where the hell were you? And trying to make it look like Steiner was abandoning him or something. Just totally didn't come off well in execution. But Steiner came in. They did the whole deal where Steiner looks like he's going to take out Ciampa, but Ciampa ducks, so Steiner decks Drake instead. Ends up beating him around for a minute or two, and then hits him with the military press into the power slam for the 3. I get what they were going for here, but I mean, between seeing it done 1,000 times over the years and just the overall bad execution of what they did here, yeah, it just didn't work for me. And I'm really kind of torn here with the whole Ciampa-Steiner program. I love the idea of the match, and I am looking forward to it, from a surface level, but I think it's more, I'm just merely interested in seeing them face off in a match, and not so much for anything they've done to build it up. Because the story itself has been pretty dull. And they sort of just launched into it head on, and it just doesn't feel as hot of a title feud as it should. Kind of just feels like standard champion versus challenger match. And that sucks because I presume Steiner's winning the belt next week. I don't know why you go as hard with pushing a guy like that if you didn't immediately go full Brock Lesnar mode and just have him steamroll his way to winning the belt. But if Steiner is winning next week, then I really felt they should have done a better job building anticipation for that title win, because right now it just seems really flat. So I really don't know what to expect out of that match. Of course, WWE, I don't know what to fucking expect with anything. Much like I don't know what to expect anymore about this show. I mentioned in the last few shows how I was probably going to review everything up through the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view or the Halloween Havoc show and decide whether or not I wanted to keep recapping NXT after the fact, depending on how good or bad the show was. I think I'm going to make that judgment call after next week. If I'm hedging my bets now, I'm putting stock in the show next week being on par with a lot of what I've seen over the last few weeks, that being not all that good. So right now I have several ideas of where I'd like to run with the show on Fridays, and I kind of went back and forth whether or not I wanted to try and get back into watching shows like Impact or MLW or another product similar to what I'm doing with the NWA right now. But then there's the problem of trying to find streams of the shows, and generally I'm not all that intrigued in either product or what they're doing right now. I just feel like it'd be a waste of time. Plus, I already subject myself to mostly bad indie level wrestling every week with AEW, so why tack on something else that's just going to be a similar style but way lower in production value and quality? But the more I think about it, I've got the Peacock subscription. They have been consistent with getting some of the old classic content on there. A lot of it being stuff I grew up watching. So I think it'd be fun to go back and check out some of those old shows again and, sort of relive my childhood in a way. The problem with a lot of the territorial footage is that they've only got certain episodes or seasons updated right now. So, even if I wanted to review something like Smoky Mountain Wrestling, there's not a whole lot to choose from there right now. They do seem to have a pretty extensive library of the Mid-Atlantic TBS studio wrestling shows. They got the NWA WCW library from November 85 through 89. Mid-South they have from 81 to 85. World Class Championship Wrestling's on there now. AWA. They've really updated the playlist in the last several months. And I remember that being one of the big things that people complained about when they switched the network over to Peacock, and everyone like myself that used to binge watch all the territorial footage kept going, when are they going to upload the territorial library? Well, it only took them half a year to get going, but they're getting the content on there. But I think my plan, given my anticipation for where I think the current direction of NXT is headed, I think once we wrap up Halloween Havoc next week, my plan for the Friday show will be starting with AEW Dynamite. And then, honestly, I'd really like to get back to rewatching some of these NWA studio wrestling shows. And I think the best way to start would be to just go from November of 85 and head on up from there. And I would either go with World Class from 82, which, for those that need a little bit of historical context, was really kind of viewed as the beginning of the boom years for World Class. And late that year, it kickstarted probably the most successful and biggest box office feud they ever did with the Freebirds and the Von Erichs. So maybe for timeline's sake, it would be better to start late in that year, or at least somewhere on par with where the NWA studio shows begin, just to keep everything relatively close. Kind of treat it like a retro review, or this day in history kind of review. Either that, or I would go with Mid-South as the second territorial retro show to recap. And 1982 in Mid-South. That was, well, obviously that was several years before their relaunching as the UWF, but I think 1982 was also the point where they started expanding their territory quite a bit, because wasn't that around the time Leroy McGurk and Paul Bosch started doing talent exchanges in Texas, and They ended up relocating to Louisiana for tapings. God, this stuff is almost so foreign to me at this point. I just haven't been keeping up on my history. I got all kinds of books, but God knows I ever have the time to reread the material. But, this is all just speculation at this point. I know I definitely want to rewatch the NWA shows because, that's where my historical knowledge really dates back to, mid-'80s. Some of the more classic content, especially like 81 to 82, I might need to do a little more research on, especially with the territories, with the constant roster rotations and fluctuations of talents, guys jumping from one organization to the other in short time spans. I mean, it's all a blur to me right now. So it'll either be a toss-up between WCCW or Mid-South. Or, what I could do, hypothetically, is if I split down the middle, I could do NWA on the Friday show and then carry over another one of those retro shows or those classic shows into the Monday show and just kind of cap it off that way. I would still probably choose between World Class or Mid-South either way. I'm not going to have enough time to watch all three of them. There's just no way. But I'll pick and choose. The other thing too, like I could easily run with the standard recaps of the Retro Nitros or Thunders or, talk about ECW, but to be blunt, I didn't watch a whole lot of ECW growing up. Just never was my flavor of wrestling. And, the Nitro recaps have already been done to death, and I think Brian Alvarez already did a real solid job putting himself through a 6-year torture of reporting on every Nitro episode from the 95 debut at the Mall of America up to the last show through March of 2001. And, God knows I need to subject myself to watching anything from WCW during that 98 to 2001 time frame. No, thank you. I watched TNA 10 years ago. That's the closest I ever need to reliving that trauma. Anyway, now that I've spent about 20 plus minutes on all that whole tangent, at least I can look to give myself a fresh start going forward and cleanse myself of this NXT stench. AEW Dynamite will surely have enough dumb material for me to rant about, but at least I'll have fun with that instead of wallowing about how boring and uneventful NXT 2.0 is every week. Who knows? Maybe a future project for NXT would be to go back and watch some of those old shows just to, relive the magical glory days. The other thing, too, is it might be good to get some perspective and see just how badly we used to overrate those shows years back. Or who knows, maybe they do stack up years later. Anyway, let's get into the other half of the show this week, that being the final coverage of the G1 Climax tournament. It has been a pretty interesting month getting back into watching New Japan's product and just seeing how everything's chugging along in the post-pandemic era. But we have come to the final week, and I'll share my thoughts about the tournament overall at the very end, but I do need to cover the final A-Block show as well as the Okada-Cobb match from Night 18. And then I'll wrap up the final night at the tail end. And I guess I should note this too, with Night 18 and the B-Block, because everything else on that show didn't really matter except for the main event to determine the winner of the block, the only match I ended up watching on that show was the Okada-Cobb match. So when I get to that part, don't be surprised if you're like, well, why'd you skip over 85% of the show? The only match that I watched was the Okada-Cobb match because that was the only one that really mattered. So, anyway, we will start with Monday night's show, which was the final A-Block show. And we were not off to a particularly uplifting start. The first A-Block match for the night was Toru Yano and Tomohiro Ishii. And as much as a fan I am of Ishii, it is still a Yano match. And you might figure I'd at least get some solid enjoyment out of watching Ishii just pound on Yano and beat his ass for a while. Nah. Still had to endure his stupid comedy. And worst of all, they actually had Yano pin Ishii with a backslide after kicking him in the groin. so fuck that match. Second block match was Yujiro Takahashi and Shingo Takagi. Big story they played up here was basically, in order for Shingo to remain alive in the tournament, he did need to win here. And, well, the match ended up having a real interesting ending, which I'll get to in a minute. Action was solid for the most part. Again, it's a Bullet Club match, so take solid with a grain of salt. Although, to be fair, most of the heel tricks here just considered of Peter getting involved, which really didn't play into the match a whole lot. Certainly didn't reach evil levels of ridiculousness. But the finish here ended up boiling down to Takahashi dragging Shingo out to the floor and trying to win by countout. And they kept teasing the double countout back and forth for a while, but it ended up leading to Takahashi hitting the Pimp Juice DDT to Shingo. He tried to break the count, but Shingo grabbed a hold of him, gave him a Death Valley driver on the floor, and right as Shingo tried to crawl back under the bottom rope, Takahashi grabbed a hold of his ankle, and that led to the double countout. So, the announcers are going back and forth for a while on, whether or not it was a no contest or a double countout, but the ruling seemed to be a countout, which meant that both guys got 1 point each. However, that added a wrinkle at this point because Shingo was at 13 points, while Abushi, Zack, and Kenta were at 12. So, basically, from a mathematical point of view, if any of those three guys won their designated matches, Shingo was automatically out. So, run your numbers to try and figure out the possibilities of Shingo remaining in the tournament. Basically, it all boiled down to whether or not those guys would win their matches via countout or a time limit draw. So, real interesting dynamic there. So then we had Zack Sabre Jr. and Tonga Loa in the semi-main, and this actually ended up being a pretty damn fine match by the end. The deal going in here was that Zack needed a win to stay alive in the G1, which, given the whole story they were running with Shingo with the prior match, you could probably put 2 and 2 together and figure Tonga was going over in the end. But the match was still enjoyable. A lot of back and forth action here with Tonga getting worked over a lot in the early goings, but kept finding ways to power through submissions. Can't say I was a particular fan of the running DDT off the turnbuckle pad, only for Tonga to immediately no-sell it and spray back up to hit a clothesline. But looking past that, Tonga ended up countering a couple more sub-holds at the end, and Zack tried for a flash pin over Tonga, but he reversed it into a roll-up of his own and pinned him. And it basically eliminated Zack from the tournament, which sucks, because I really figured they were going with Zack here. But it was still a good match. Definitely Tonga's best tournament match, and I don't even think it's a question. And I know I kind of crapped on him in one of my previous G1 recaps, talking about how I just don't see a whole lot in Tonga Loa like I do in Tama Tonga as a singles guy. And I still stand by that opinion, but I surely don't want that to come off like I'm ruling out any potential for Tonga to work out as a singles guy. And that brought us to the big main event of Kenta and Kota Abushi. And unless they decided to go with the time limit draw here, which they did tease, this one was pretty much down to determining the block winner, which sucks for Shingo, but what can he do? Love watching Abushi strikes, man. He is so swift. I almost kind of wish I could just watch a straight Abushi kickboxing match in New Japan just to see how he would pull that off. Anyway, they kind of went to the well here early on with, playing the same deal from the Takahashi-Shingo match from earlier. Kenta would bring Abushi out to the floor and try to win by countout. It actually led to a point where both guys brawled all the way through the exit tunnel and behind the curtain, and Abushi basically had to haul ass all the way from the back when Red Shoes was up to like a 16 or 17 count. Tell you what, though, Abushi really knows how to milk a 20 count. Although, looking back in hindsight, there were definitely like 1 or 2 points where Abushi clearly didn't beat the 20 count, but they kept the match going anyway. But, they ended up working the action in the ring like your standard main event style match. Like I said, I watched the match 2 years ago when Kenta made his big return to New Japan, and that ended up being a pretty damn good match from what I remember. And I remember being very critical of Kenta during that time, thinking most of his matches weren't really all that good. Anyway, they traded back and forth for a while. Nice little tribute to Shinsuke there from Abushi with the running Kinshasa, which kind of always forget that he's still with WWE, but at least he's enjoying life over here in the States doing surfing and basically collecting a paycheck doing fuck all on the main roster. Props to that guy. The big spot in this match was the deal where Abushi put Kenta on the table on the outside, and well, initially the table leg collapsed under Kenta's weight, but because Ibushi's a complete idiot, he decided, I'm just going to do the dive anyway. So, of course, he does the big splash, and not only does the table not break, but when they show the replay, you could clearly see Kenta's head smash against the guardrail, which definitely did not look fun. And pretty much from the point from both guys got back in the ring from that table spot, they really cranked up the match in terms of intensity. Abushi ended up hitting a first Kamigoye for a near fall, more back and forth with some false finishes. Kenta ran Abushi into the exposed buckle for a near fall roll-up. And fast forward to the end, Abushi hit Kenta with a Kamigoye to the back of the head, hit him with the move from the front, and got the win at just over the 25-minute mark. So Abushi wins the block, and he is headed off to the races for the finals, which I'll cover that tragedy in a bit. Definitely not what I expected them to go with. Abushi was in the finals 2 years ago, and I think he beat Jay White, correct? And then if my history is right, Abushi wrestled Okada for the IWGP World title at Wrestle Kingdom in the following January, lost to Okada on night 1, only for Okada to turn around and lose the belt to Naito in the big double championship main event the following night. So, interesting decision, I guess. My New Japan knowledge has not been up to date for the entirety of the year, but I do know Abushi dropped the unified IWGP heavyweight title to Ospreay this year, and obviously we know the whole deal with Ospreay getting injured and having to drop the belt, blah, 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 that whole deal. And obviously we know Shingo's the champion now, so basically they're kind of doing a 180 with the whole tournament to get Abushi back into the title picture, which I guess makes sense looking at the whole layout of the tournament now. Although I can definitely see if you've been following New Japan over the last few years, you're probably not particularly thrilled with the idea of Abushi getting into the G1 finals for, what did Kelly say, like 4th year in a row now? I've read a lot of reports about the whole booking stagnation period New Japan's been in pretty much right around the time the pandemic first hit. And I really think the pandemic has exposed even more just how gutted New Japan's roster is. I mean, AEW certainly hasn't helped the cause either, but man, it's just like there's not a lot going there. And meanwhile, I'm sitting there disappointed that guys like Cobb and Zach end up taking back seats in the tournament because they've been the real highlights of the whole G1. But all that feels for nothing at this point. So anyway, that was the final A-Block show, which it's not even worth going back and watching now unless you're just interested in seeing the Kenta Abushi main event for the spectacle of the matter. It was a good match, don't get me wrong, but if you already know the results and the winner of the G1 this year, you really don't need to go out of your way to hunt it down. Honestly, it'd probably just make you sad knowing what was to come on the finale night. But anyway, that led to the final B-Block show. And again, because the only match that really mattered on the night was Okada and Jeff Cobb in the main event, considering everyone else in the block was mathematically eliminated, the main event was the only thing I watched on the show, which thankfully saved me a lot of time in the long haul. And it actually helped me get a little more invested in this match than I probably would have if I tried to watch the entirety of the card. So, well, I guess the best thing to do here would be to start with the match context. So this was the tiebreaker match. If Okada wins, he automatically wins the tiebreaker and wins the block. And if there's a tie via countout or a draw and or Cobb just straight up wins, he advances to the finals and wins the block. Which, I mean, factoring in how New Japan formula usually works, I guess I always should have figured Okada was going over in the end, but I'll get to that in a minute. Match itself was, well, to put it to you bluntly, it was every Okada match you've probably ever seen, possibly excluding his match with Kenny Omega, where Omega basically forced him to work a full PWG mode match for the entire thing. It was about 15 to 20 minutes of moderately boring wrestling. Nothing particularly good, nothing particularly bad, just standard paint-by-numbers wrestling. And within the last 10 minutes, it basically picked up to feeling like an actual main event level match where they were actually digging in more offensively and picking up the intensity and actually got the crowd somewhat into it. Lots of trading back and forth between both guys, trying for their signature moves and finishers at various points throughout. Okada hit a Tope Con Hero at one point, and I could almost immediately hear Excalibur calling that spot from the States, Tope Con Hero! And Cobb actually had an absolutely sick spot here where he reversed Okada's tombstone into a spiked tombstone, but well, I don't know if you guys realize this or not, but Cobb is really fucking strong. So after he spikes Okada with the first pile driver, he stands back up with Okada upside down in the tombstone position, and then he just spins him around and hits a spike pile driver. It was awesome. I actually thought it would have been kind of cool if Cobb, instead of going for the second tombstone, he just hit Tour of the Islands and won right then and there. But well, it unfortunately wasn't in the booking finish. There was a really bizarre spot about 2/3 of the way through. Cobb picked up Okada and tried to place him on the top rope for, I think he was going for Tour of the Islands, but instead it just kind of turned into both guys falling backward and Okada barely etching out an awkward looking DDT. Not really sure what they were going for there, but didn't look particularly good. But fast forward a few minutes later, both guys are trading and doing a lot of reversals, the Rainmaker and Tour of the Islands. Cobb ended up trying to steal the Rainmaker to put Okada away, but that got thwarted. Okada ended up hitting the Michinoku driver, hit the Rainmaker, and sealed the deal to win the block. And, well, to say I was disappointed would probably be a smidge of irony. Although, I can't say I was ever really invested in the G1 either way to really care who actually won. I just like the booking and the story they built up with Cobb throughout the whole thing, and that's why I wanted to see him win. Yeah, plus I kind of figured, they have been back to the well so many times with Okada over the years. It's like, can't you think of something a little more fresh? And yeah, I get there's an overarching story with Okada and Abushi for a couple of years, and I guess in retrospect, Okada is a much bigger deal to the business than Jeff Cobb is right now, but you gotta figure they would have maybe wanted to go with the upset just to give the product some new kind of energy or new life. I don't know. Maybe this is just more the casual viewer perspective coming out than any kind of hardcore fan analyzer, but I was just hoping for something different, that's all. I would highly recommend you check the match out for quality's sake if you didn't watch it. Yeah, if you had any emotional attachment to seeing Cobb winning, you'll probably be heartbroken by the end of it, but it's still a match worth checking out. Again, nothing I'd say you'd want to put on your match of the year list or anything, but certainly a quality main event to check out regardless. And that said, that all led to the finals of Abushi versus Okada from Thursday, which, goddamn, that whole situation sucks. I mean, to tell you the truth, there really isn't any reason for me to even try to detail any parts of the match because there was really only one thing that mattered here, and that was the way the match abruptly ended. If you didn't watch the match, first of all, don't. Basically, all you need to know is that the match just about surpassed the 25-minute mark when Abushi went up to try and hit a Phoenix Splash, and I knew as soon as he crashed down on the mat, something was immediately wrong. He landed right on top of his right arm, and they went back and forth for a long time speculating whether he had a separated shoulder or a broken wrist or actually just separated his elbow. They ran the whole gamut, basically. By the end of it, it seemed more likely it was a separated shoulder. So Red Shoes ends up calling the match. Okada wins by forfeit, and that moment right there pretty much summed up the entirety of how I felt about the entire G1 tournament right then and there. Actually, if you caught the camera panning to Okada right as soon as they called for the bell, that was the exact face that I made when I was thinking to myself, yep, that's about how I feel about this entire month-long G1 right about now. That Okada face. And, of course, anyone that's been following Ibushi's track record in 2021 knows that, he hasn't had a stellar year. If you all remember, he had that really bad case of aspiration pneumonia over the summer where he just kind of fell off the face of the earth for a period of time. And, that actually really had people worrying whether or not there was something more severe. But, yeah, man, it sucks. I really don't know one way or the other if the match would have been an instant classic injury or no injury, but it was certainly on track to being a fairly decent match. And, of course, Kelly was talking about how he was having flashbacks to the situation that happened with Eddie Guerrero years ago in WWF. And I remember that exact spot he was talking about, too. Don't remember who he was wrestling, but there was a match. It was like either 2000 or 2001. I think it was on SmackDown. It was like right around the time Eddie debuted with the rest of the Radicals. So it must have been 2000 then, right? Oh, fuck it, I don't even remember at this point. I'm surprised I remember half the shit that went down in the Attitude Era. But, yeah, I do remember that spot because Eddie went for a frog splash and totally blew out his left arm. And you can even see on the landing when he smashed his arm into the ring mat, his elbow totally popped out of the socket. Just brutal shit. Kind of a similar situation here with what happened to Abushi, but it looked more like a shoulder separation than anything else. So anyway, it ended up being a pretty dreary ending to the G1, but to tell you the truth, bro, the injury here was very encapsulating of this entire tournament from the jump. I don't do star ratings or anything, mostly because I think that system is entirely broken thanks to Dave Meltzer's bias toward anything involving Kenny Omega. But if you do invest in star ratings, I don't think I would put anything in this tournament above a 4. My favorite match was the Ishii Sabre Jr. match from Night 9 in Nagoya, I believe it was. But even that match I wouldn't say was anything above 3 3/4. Some of the best stories they culminated throughout the entire tournament were essentially meaningless once they eliminated the two key players those stories were centered around. Cobb smashing all the competition only to lose to Okada in the semifinals was a total bust. And Zack going on a submission tear and beating some of the top guys in the tournament only to turn around and lose to Tonga Loa the final night, just a big dud. And I don't have anything against Abushi or Okada. Abushi's had a handful of pretty damn good matches this year in the G1, but does it really matter at the end of the day? And I really haven't been impressed with any of Okada's matches at all. I still think people overrate him way too much as an overall talent. Of course, a lot of that buzz has really subsided over the years with Omega leaving New Japan, which I guess is part and parcel with why people were all giggly tits for Okada in the last few years, because he just so happened to have really good matches with Kenny Omega in New Japan. But yeah, Okada winning in the end, whether it was planned or not, Like, what is new or fresh about that? You want my honest opinion? Okada has basically become the John Cena prototype of New Japan. And I mean that figuratively, not John Cena's former OVW gimmick from the early 2000s. But, like, am I wrong? How many years has Okada been at New Japan's sort of Mount Rushmore of top faces? Going on something like 7 or 8 years now? When did Okada really take off in New Japan? Was it 2014, 2015? I remember he beat AJ to win the belt, and that was the start of his long reign as IWGP champion. Of course, during that period, we all remember the whole Omega Okada deal where every time they wrestled, it was the greatest match of all time, 6 3/4 star, come in my mouth, so awesome, all that hard garbage. Because Meltzer was on the New Japan porno obsession at that point, and oh, lo and behold, now that AEW is a thing, New Japan's like a total afterthought on Wrestling Observer. How easy it is to jump off the bandwagon. I know people have speculated for years whether or not Dave was on the New Japan payroll or even on the Kenny Omega Young Bucks payroll. I have no way of knowing that. I mean, it all kind of seems like relative speculation, but I mean, if you pay close attention to how Meltzer rates those guys' matches, you got to presume there's something going on there, right? I mean, I think New Japan's a prime example. Look at how much New Japan was like at the total helm of wrestling discussion just a couple years ago. Now it's like a total afterthought, non-existent. It's crazy. Anyway, getting back to Okada for a minute. He just really feels like New Japan's John Cena at this point. He's been on top for so long. There's nothing really fresh or innovative about him at this point. All the while, they're actively passing up on guys like Cobb when, I mean, let's be frank, with the popularity of companies like AEW right now, New Japan could really use a fresh coat of paint in their product. You know, Shingo as the champion doesn't really seem to be doing a whole lot, and the higher probability that this all eventually leads to Okada winning the belt down the road, it's like, do we really need to see that again? I guess the key drama there will be that, you know, once Abushi gets healthy, he would challenge Okada for the IWGP title. As, you know, they said they could have the match that they were probably expected to have here, but I mean, who even knows how long that'll be before Abushi gets healthy again? I mean, we still don't even know the extent of his injury. It's frustrating. And the crazy thing is, too, is like I really wouldn't even say I've always been that big a fan of New Japan Pro Wrestling. I love certain elements of their product. I appreciate that style, and when done right, it can be a very enjoyable product to watch. But I only started really paying close attention to New Japan's product around 2013 or 2014. Like, honestly, right about around the time the rumblings were going around that AJ was leaving TNA and becoming a free agent. And you know, obviously I grew up with a little New Japan history, you know, watching and studying guys like Antonio Inoki, Giant Baba, Fujinami, Liger, Ultimo Dragon, guys like that. You know, probably in a lot of ways, I have people like Bischoff to thank for helping to expand that style of wrestling on a national network television, just in ways that NWA can never do. But as far as actually following New Japan as part of my, like, habitual wrestling consumption, really wasn't until the early to mid 2010s that I started following the product regularly. But it is just so hard to get emotionally invested into anything with their current product now. And, you know, like I alluded to earlier, I think a lot of that stems from the rising popularity of companies like AEW. New Japan lost a lot of their key talents over the last few years. The headbutting between both companies with management and, you know, wrestlers over contract agreements led to guys like Omega and the Bucks departing on relatively bad terms. I mean, obviously New Japan has a pretty loyal affiliation with Ring of Honor in terms of partnerships that may have resulted in AEW not being pleased that, like, if they ever wanted to work a partnership or talent exchange with New Japan, that maybe, like, they weren't going to be a first priority. It's a whole slew of issues at play there. But, like, you can clearly tell New Japan's taken a big hit with their product since AEW's inception. There's no buzz about the product. News coverage from the main wrestling markets are very minimal. Top talent being a big issue for them. Obviously, the pandemic was the catalyst that really put this company down. I mean, It's no wonder a lot of wrestling bloggers and independent outlets are talking about how they really didn't have much in terms of expectations going into the G1 this year. I mean, who could blame them? I don't know, man. I'm still trying to discern whether or not I even want to stick around to check out the Tokyo Dome shows in January. And truthfully, with the landscape of where we are in the world right now, who's to say those shows won't end up getting delayed or called off entirely? I mean, with all the fear-mongering going on in the public media over the bug, it is entirely possible they end up delaying the Tokyo Dome show. You know how it goes. One person gets sick and the whole fucking country gets shut down. See Australia. So, I don't know. I'm going to wrap this up. If you all have any thoughts about the G1 or New Japan's product in general, let me know if you think I'm way off base with anything here. In short, I really didn't think much of the tournament overall. There's some good wrestling and some nice contrast with a lot of the hot garbage I watch over here in the States, but certainly nothing blow away or earth-shattering that broke the wrestling medium. Maybe one match out of the entire tournament that I would consider putting in like my top 20 list for matches of the year, but certainly it's like nowhere near the top 15 or even top 10. Obviously, I'm talking about the Ishii-Zack Sabre Jr. match. You know, and even with the Kota Abushi injury, the other thing too is it just really hasn't generated a lot of mainstream publicity. You know, it's all about people arguing over what's more important between ratings and demographics with Rampage and SmackDown because, everything's stupid. Guys, if you want to stay posted with the future FSWR content, make sure you subscribe, comment, and give the show a like down below. Help me out in the algorithms. Hopefully some of this was insightful, and I think trying to do some fresh content on this channel will generate a little more intrigue than talking about a god-awful developmental program that has no business being publicized on national cable television every week. They better fucking hope for a stellar Halloween Havoc show if they want me to keep watching that product. And as I noted at the very beginning, I do foresee some revamping of the shows in terms of topic coverage going forward. And I'm running pretty late here, so I think I'm going to hold off until Monday to sort of go over where I'd like to take the direction of both shows. Obviously, I threw out a couple ideas that I've been jotting down, but I think when I come back on Monday, I'll kind of just provide an actual layout. Mostly, I think the Friday show will be the bulk of the change. I don't see a whole lot coming with the Monday show. Maybe I'll add something if there's like no pay-per-view coverage or weekend stuff to talk about, but I'll figure that out. And I think that'll do it for today. So really appreciate it if you stuck through. And you know, as I mentioned earlier, I really would like to hear your feedback with the G1. If you even watched the tournament, if you didn't watch the tournament and you have been a fan of New Japan's product in the past, let me know what was the turnoff for you. You know, and if there's another detail or fault about New Japan's product that I may have sidetracked or didn't mention in full depth, you know, feel free to let me know about that too. Just, it's unfortunate. And like I said, that Kota Abushi injury, it sucks, but it is very telling of where New Japan's product is right now. Until Monday, where we cover Rampage, Dynamite, and NWA Power, take care all. Peace out.